Okay, so let's continue with building out our ability to save our contact to the database. So in the last video, we created a simple form, HTML form, and we were able to post to a page. So the method here is post, and the action is to open this page called savecontact.php. So that's what we're working on right now. And right now all it does is it pops up the title save contact and a header that says saving the contact. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to we need to take a look at our data. So the way that the form saves the data is in something called a post. And there's two different options of this. You can do post or a get. So if I were to do a get here, whoops, get, hit save, what you'll see is if we go back here, we'll reload this page. So if I had information in here and I hit submit, if it's a get, what happens is I can actually see in the URL the variable called first name equals Fred, variable called last name equals Flintstone, and the email equals test@40. Anyways, that will be visible. That's a bit of a challenge, especially if you're asking people for personal things like passwords and things like that. It's exposed. So normally what you want to do is you want to post the information. And hit save. Now if I go back in and reload, now when I hit submit, I don't see the information in the URL. And where it is it's actually stored in an array. And if you've done other languages such as Java, typically you access the different positions in an array by saying, you know, the array at position 0 or the array at position 1. Well, here, they actually named those positions right here. So one of the positions is called first name, another position is called last name, and we can access these right here. So I'm going to create a variable, and all variables in PHP start with a $sign. So I'm going to say first name. Oh, forgot something important here. Now we're going to actually build some PHP. So I need to have the PHP tag. So this whole page is HTML. Inside these PHP tags is actually code. This is where the PHP part works. And so in here, now I can say, I'll create a variable called first name, and I'll say that it is equal to $_ and you can see there's this automatic thing that comes up. It says post, and you can see the data type's an array. So I'm going to take the element that's called first name and assign it into the variable called first name. And let's just check and see if this is getting us what we want. So I'm going to say echo. That is the equivalent of the print command in Java. So I'm going to say echo first name, and I'm going to add, if I want to add to this string, I'm going to put a little dot here. This allows me to concatenate things together. So I'll add in my variable called first name, and then I'll put in a line return. So I'm going to say BR, line break here. And then just like every other programming language, or most other programming languages, we end the line with a semicolon. So I hit save. And now when I refresh this page, I can see first name was Fred, right? It doesn't show it in the URL or anything. It was able to pull it from this post array. So I'll do the same thing with the last name and the email address. So now these are case sensitive and need to match exactly what we have in the other in the other screen. So for example, here it says last name. Over here it has to say last name. And just to prove a point, I'll create for email. If I spell it differently, let's see what happens. So I say email. But I'll put a little spelling mistake in here. I'll leave it at the M. Okay, so I'm going to hit save. And I go back, and when I refresh my screen now, see how we got Fred Flintstone, that part was fine. But when I got to the email one, it says undefined index, EL, right? On line 17. Now, this, because we're using a local development environment, it actually will put this error on the screen. Oftentimes, if you're using a hosted solution, they'll have a lot of these notifications turned off, so you might not even get to see some of these error messages. Let's go in, add our M back here, hit save, refresh, and now we can see first name, last name, and email. So that's all the information we want. We've got it stored nicely in these variables called first name, last name, and email. So now what we need to do is let's send the first name, last name, and email to the database. And there's a few steps that have to happen, and they're actually the same steps that we would use if we're using a database manually. So if you think about it, we had to first log into our database, and so that's where we opened this up, and we had to give our username and password, and we had to tell it which database we want to use. So same thing is required here. So here, sorry, just lost my train of thought for a minute there. So here what we're going to do is we're going to simulate that in PHP. So we're going to say step 1, connect to the database. Step 2, create the SQL statement. Step 3, we are going to prepare the SQL statement to prevent SQL injection attacks. Step 4, we will actually execute the command. Step 5, we will disconnect from the database. And then the last thing that we're going to do here, step 6, redirect to another web page. Okay, so we got lots of steps. So step 1, it says to connect to the database. So to do that, I'm going to create a variable called con, short form for connection, and I'm going to say it equals a new PDO. Now, PDO takes a couple parameters. The first parameter it takes is our actual hosted environment that we would like to use. So here I'm going to say mysql host equals, and I'm going to use localhost. Okay, semicolon, and then my username, or sorry, my database name. So I'm going to say db name equals, and I called it PHP. And then the next thing we have, and you can see there's little helping text here, is the username and password. So my username that I logged in with was root, and the password was admin. Now you can see PHP Storm is pretty slick. It adds in these little, DSN, username, password to help us remember what these things are for. Those aren't actually compiled or text that you would type. The system's just putting those in to help us understand it better. Okay, so that'll set up our connection, and then again with databases and the way PHP works, it doesn't often tell you what the errors are. So for our database connection, I'm going to add in something. I'm going to say set the attributes, and I'm going to say PDO, and we're going to say error mode. Okay, so show me the errors, and we're going to set up show me the exceptions. Okay, so now that should connect us to our database. So step 2 is to create the SQL statement. So what we want to do is exactly what we did this earlier, where we want to insert into contacts, and then these are the fields we want to fill up with these values. So the only difference is here, instead of hard coding this to say Fred for first name, we're going to use a variable. And we actually have our information already stored in a variable, right? The first name is stored in this variable. So what we can do is, here we're going to say SQL, so this is going to be our command, is equal to a string that says insert into contacts, and we'll list out our fields. So it was first name, and then you can break it over a couple of lines. We'll put in the values, and here what we're going to do is I'm going to do something. It's similar but slightly different. You see how I've got the colon first name, colon last name, and colon email. Okay, and so this is the same as our statement that we used in Workbench. The difference is that we're now using variables instead of hard coding these names in here. Okay, so step 3, it says we need to prepare the SQL statement to prevent SQL injection attacks. And what that means is, if we look at our web form, let's go back a page here. I could technically type in something like drop table contacts as my first name. And then what happens is this command will get run on the database itself. And there's lots of stories out there of people getting their websites hacked because they didn't prevent SQL injection attacks. So what we need to do is, there's been lots of research done on it, and they know how to sanitize these inputs. So what we're going to do is, in step 3 here, we are going to prepare things. So we're going to say, we're going to create a new variable called command, and we'll use our connection to prepare our SQL. Okay, so this is going to be our command. It uses our connection to prepare the SQL, and I'm going to bind the parameters. And so what this does is, I'm going to take this first name variable here, and I'm going to bind it or associate it with the variable called first name. And then I'm going to tell it what type of data should be in here. So I say PDO param string. And then we add in how long the string should be. So I said the names should be 30, I think, right? Yeah, 30. Okay, so again, see where it says parameter? Don't type that in. Hopefully it's coming through on yours, that these have got a little gray box around them. That's just system generated. It's not something that is actually there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for our last name field. Okay, and it was the same length, so we can just leave it as is. And then we're going to do it again, this time for our email. And that we had a length of 120. Okay, so here, I'll just move it over a little bit in case you're still typing. You can hit pause here if you want. But this allows us to prevent the SQL injection. And this is equivalent, at this point in time, to have typed out this line. Okay? It's like typing out that whole line, but we haven't actually run the command. So, you know, if I were to type in another one here, okay, at this point, it's if I look in my table, you know, this new line with Betty Rubble, it's not in there. I have to actually execute the command. See how it says execute here? And then if I look in my table, I'll see that Betty was added. So we need to do the same thing in PHP. We've created our command, we've bound it to our data types, we've bound it to the actual you know, our first name, last name variables, but now we need to execute. So we're going to say command execute. And then we're going to disconnect from the database. So I'm going to say connection is now equal to null. And that helps prevent any type of, or helps reduce the risk of that connection being used maliciously. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say header. And in here I'm going to say location, and let's say we'll create a string called contacts.php. Okay, and on that screen we're going to show a list of all of our contacts. So I'm going to hit save. So let's see here. So let's put a different name in here. So let's go Bam Bam Rubble. And we'll give them a test email account. I say submit. Oh, and what happens, it happened so fast we didn't even get to see it. It went all the way to save, and then it tried to go to our contacts.php page, which doesn't exist yet. However, if all goes well, Bam Bam should now be in our database. So let's take a look. So if I run my select star, there's Bam Bam right at the bottom. So we've just read from the web form and posted it into our database. I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video what we're going to look at is how can we display this table on this page here that doesn't exist. See you in a minute.